Good evening and welcome everyone. I'm glad you could join us. My name is Zoltan Bodis and Michael Gropp's our speaker tonight. Michael and I have been friends since about the sixth grade, and we went to school together through high school. He went off to military college with about a 27-year or so RCAF career. But we managed to meet up at least once a year and many times more often. I've tried to have him out before, but he always gets back here in the summers and on Christmas holidays, which really doesn't work for us. But one of the positives that's come out of all this COVID stuff is Zoom, and Zoom has allowed us to bring in anybody we want from anywhere to speak. So Michael again now is he's in the Ottawa region, has been for several years. After the forces, he became an air ambulance pilot. And so that's what he wants to talk to us about, his seeking career as a pilot there, and then onwards as an air ambulance pilot in Halifax area, and then on to Ottawa. Michael is probably even more verbose than I am, so he's asked you to hold the questions until after he's finished, and keep your thoughts and questions together. I'm sure you'll enjoy Michael's presentation, and welcome, Michael.
So, to start us off with a little bit of helicopter humor to set the tone, if you will. Can enjoy that for a second. I think that's actually a Cheyenne. Once upon a time at Hunter Army Air Force Base, got hosted by an American Army Aviation Battalion that I got to fly a Chinook, but they had Cobras, so that was really quite the treat. Just to basically, give you my bona fides to acknowledge why I might be qualified to speak on this topic. If you take a look at my logbooks from 1977 to 2012, I ended up having a little over 4,000 hours on military Sea Kings, about 2,600 hours on S-76 air ambulance, and the last 9 months of my active helicopter career, I got about 200 hours on an Augusta 139. A lot of people don't realize that the type of civilian licenses held in Canada are kind of an inverse pyramid. By far in the fixed wing world, most licenses are either recreational pilot or private pilot licenses, then fewer commercial licenses, and fewer yet again airline transport licenses for fixed wing. In the helicopter world, the number of private helicopter licenses are very rare. You have a block of commercial helicopter pilot licenses that would actually be smaller than you would expect, except that you need some nighttime to get an ATPL-H. And you can have a very productive full-time helicopter pilot career without ever flying after dark. The point of the bigger numbers of the more senior licenses is that helicopters are very expensive. Only the very rich can fly them recreationally. So that sort of twist in the number of licenses is because if you're going to fly a helicopter, you must almost always do it to do a living, to make a living, to do it professionally. And a lot of people aren't really aware of that. I am going to talk a little bit about my family background for a second. That is my father's stone at the RCAF museum at the Trash Hauler base in Trenton. And he actually joined the RCAF as a regular in 1936, long before World War II started, and did 27 years plus a day. And I bring that up because my parents delayed marriage because of the war, as was normal in that day. And as a regular Air Force guy, he had to stay in Europe much longer after people got to demobilize and come back home. And then there was a series of very quick postings after the war. My oldest brother is born in Calgary, then there's a period of time in Ottawa, and Patrick was born back in Trenton. But I wanted to mention why I have Moose Jaw in my birth certificate. Interestingly enough, the things are starting to get ugly with the Russians. The Cold War is starting up in the early 1950s. So they see the need to start training fleets of Sabre pilots. And my father actually was the first guy sent back to Saskatchewan to start demothballing the BCATP bases, primarily Moose Jaw. And that's why I ended up being born there. And my earliest memories were crawling around a blister on one of the demothballized hangars at Moose Jaw before they started opening up the PMQs. I would say that I cannot remember not wanting to have been a military pilot. I can tell you I'm 8 years old, sitting in the kitchen in a PMQ at RCAF station Namao, just outside of Edmonton. When I'm 8 years old, when I decide exactly how I'm going to go about that, I heard a radio ad for military college, and I said, yes, that's going to be my ticket. And in fact, that's exactly how it played out. But again, I'm still relatively young when my father takes his uniform off and he moves back to his hometown and moves us into the same house that he grew up in. And that's where we stayed until it was time for me to join the military myself. But I do want to point out Air Cadets in Regina was very, very good to me. I lied about my age to get in a year early. I got to do a couple of penhold camps, including a bush survival, 6-week-long PT course when I'm 15 down in Borden, senior leaders course the next year. And as a 17-year-old, I get a power scholarship for my private pilot license at the Regina Flying Club. And then the last summer when I'm 18, before I go into the military myself, it was a nice 6-week-long exchange visit to Belgium. But in between that, okay, I'm working on a glider pilot license. And if you do it backwards, so to speak, it becomes relatively easy. Back in the day, with a power license under my belt, the only requirement for a glider license was 20 solo flights. And on attempt number 17, this is what happened. I needed to address the elephant in the room. This is still following me around 49 years later, and my 15 minutes worth of fame. All I can say about that, the only damage done to that aircraft was that crossbeam poked a hole in the fabric on the underside of the right aileron, and that was fixed with a little bit of duct tape, I think. But I would lay claim that this was prescient. I hover landed that baby in those telephone lines, and it was augured well for my future as a helicopter pilot. Okay, thank you. So off I go to military college. That's actually from my 4th year at CMR. But I do want to make mention of my first year at Royal Roads out in Victoria. On the upper parade square, looking over the castle, if you've ever been out to that place, I'm supposed to have eyes straight ahead, but I wander off to see the 2nd Destroyer Squadron sailing out the Straits of Juan de Fuca out into the Pacific Ocean at dawn. And this was quite inspiring for me. So I decided, look, Bonaventure's being decommissioned. How am I going to get to both be a military pilot and go to sea? And I came to the conclusion I needed to become a Sea King pilot, and that's also the way it played out. So summers at Portage la Prairie during between years at school and selection training. What I'll say about that is one of my summers there, my instructor, my flight commander, the basic squadron commander, and the school commandant all had Navy hat badges. The only one that didn't was the base commander. There was no Air Force guys to be found around at all. And he was a little zipper head with a dragoon's hat badge on his head. So again, these men were of influence with me early on. So school's over with, and I get to come back to Moose Jaw and get on with it with tutor training. And yes, I got to go to Dragonflight, interestingly enough. What more might I say about that? In my day, of course, you got your military pilot wings on tutors, fixed wing aircraft. Rotary wing did not come until basically a postgraduate qualification. I think Zoltan took that picture at the Moose Jaw Air Show that summer. From my white dickie, I'm a student, and the fact that I don't have any wings on my chest. I think I'm standing in front of an F5 and maybe the snowbird's taken off in the background there. So There are my nice, shiny military pilot wings presented to me by my father. That was quite a moment. Those were the summer shirt versions. But then I get to go off next to Portage la Prairie. And oh my God, you don't know how much fun that training was. First of all the pressure's off. You know that you're relatively safe. You have a set of wings on your flying suit now, and you're not likely to get fired with a flip of a pen. The other thing was that aircraft was an absolute sports car. In the warm weather, they actually took the doors off, turning it into a convertible. It was really, really quite a treat to do that kind of training. I'm going to turn this off for a second. I want to tell a story about my first flight learning how to hover that aircraft. And my sweet wife provided me with a training aid with which to do this, okay? The instructor takes you out to a quarter section wheat field near Portage, okay? And the bet that he makes, that's been made 1,000 times and still goes on to this day, I imagine, is that you cannot hover that aircraft in the confines of that humongous wheat field for more than 60 seconds without him having to take control and saving both your lives. Now, I've been to ground school. I know how the controls work, and I know how to do this. This is going to be too easy. So, of course, I make that wager. And the tricky part, of course, is there is a control lag with Kiowa's flight controls. And the way this would play out is that you have control, I have control. A gust of wind comes along. This is actually going to take me a lot longer to describe than how it actually plays out, but bear with me if you will. The aircraft starts to drift left. I know to correct that by using the cyclic to tilt the rotor right to stop that left drift, but it doesn't immediately respond, so I put in even more, way too much as it would have, and it starts going right much faster than it ever was going left in the first place. More left. Oh, by the way, when you tilt the disc like that, you start to sink, so you pull up on the collective to cause you to not hit the ground. That causes the nose to turn, and the short version is, this is what happens. I have control, you have control. I have control, oh, thank God. You try this 3 or 4 times, and this is about the way it works. I have control, and after enough of that, you promise to pay the instructor his 6 beer at the mess after the day is done. So again, another truism of helicopter aviation. The trickiest one to learn how to fly is the first one you learn how to fly, because as you go along, you get bigger aircraft with ever increasingly sophisticated flight control systems. And that's if everything is working. I'll tell you another story about flying a Sea King when things are broken. But a little bit of an insight into the start of an aviation helicopter career. What might be next? Let me flash up some more pictures if I might. Thank you for your indulgence. They're coming. Okay. I'm finished my rotary wing qualification in Portage, and I get sent off as a, erstwhile Sea King co-pilot to be trained up at 406 Squadron in Shearwater. We kill by night. 406, you may know, is the City of Saskatoon Squadron. And later on, when I'm on staff at that squadron, I'm at home on leave in Regina, and the CO gave me a TD to go spend the weekend with the reserve squadron version of those guys back up in Saskatoon, and they treated me like a king. It was a wonderful weekend. So one of the things you get to do as a student pilot on Sea Kings, and Jerry actually instructed on the Waterbird later on, so after we're all done, he might have some more information for you on that. This was part of what we got to do. The Sea King has a boat-shaped hull, and it is a multi-engine aircraft, but unless it's very cold, very windy, and we're very light, if you're in a hover and you lose an engine, you're going to go down into the drink. There are techniques you can apply, like dumping fuel, jettisoning weapons, and all kinds of stuff. Jerry would tell you putting the landing gear up really doesn't matter all that much. But you would practice these techniques to be able to take the aircraft off the water on a single engine to then go find a carrier or an airfield to do a single engine running landing on, and thus save the aircraft, if you will. But it is a big helicopter, over 10 tons, and it was some very fine flying. You'd be barely 20 inches above the water at times. And it's something that we needed to practice, and we would go do some training on it every summer that we were flying the aircraft actively. And, but oh my God, that was fun. You got to drive the aircraft around that lake right beside the main runway in Shearwater like a boat. So I'm finished my training. I'm now a qualified seagoing co-pilot, and I'm sent off to 423 Squadron. Querimus e petimus in Latin means we search and strike. And that is a picture of a Sea King. It's later on, because it's got the dark gray on medium gray, we're going to go to war camouflage paint job. All the red is removed except for the tail rotor. And it's folded up as if it's ready to go into a destroyer hangar. What might I say about this? Let me just bring up my laser pointer, if I will. This thing right here is the aft torpedo mount. There were 4 places to put weapons on. Only Mark 45s were less than 500 pounds and could go on the aft. They were sort of an obsolete weapon. So our main armament of being Mark 47 torpedoes would normally go on the mounts just underneath the sponsons. What else might I say? This is obviously a later version of the aircraft because that radar got added later. They didn't have FOD mods in the front of the engine intakes at the beginning. And as a little aside, this little marking on the aircraft beside the personnel door was for formation flying. You would line that nav light up in the crux of that marking to know that you were in good position when you were flying formation. Okay, we'll have some other better shots later on. That's the first class of vessel I got assigned to. This one's Fraser. I was in Skeena for a number of years. And what might I point out right now about this one? This is the flight deck right here. In harbor, of course, so the flight deck net stanchions are up, so people didn't fall off the flight deck into the drink. Those things were, of course, lowered for aircraft operations. Here's the hangar, and that is the TACAN antenna on this warship. That's a military equivalent of VOR DME, and I used to get a rise out of my students when I'm later on instructing. It's one thing to fly a VOR DME approach to Regina Airport, for example, but if your VOR DME station accelerates to 20 knots and then turns left hard a port, it adds a little element to your instrument approach. Okay, turn that off. But this is what it was all about. My apologies, it was the best shot of a torpedo drop I could find. This is an Aussie Navy aircraft, of course. But that was our job, anti-submarine warfare. And again, a pair of acoustic torpedoes strapped to the sides of the aircraft. Hunter-killer, we were able to detect the enemy submarine, so to speak, ourselves, and then in turn attack them. And that's a forward flight attack, if you will, in circular mode. And that's the way the weapon would get deployed on top of the contact and do a circular mode search until it got contact with the submarine itself and go in and ruin their day. What else might I say about that? We got to do other stuff, though. The hoist got used a great deal. This is the paint job that the aircraft had when I started, and red and white Canadian flags. But we could operate the hoist from the pilot seat. but it was very hard to see where the hoist is over the cargo door there on the starboard side. So it was normally done by the backseaters, navigator, and what was first called an observer, but later on an airborne equipment sensor operator. And there we're practicing a hoist to a non-flight deck capable ship, which this isn't. We're doing this to the forecastle to pretend that we're doing a transfer to a vessel that couldn't land us on. Normally, in earnest, we would just land instead of doing this kind of thing. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we landed on destroyers and frigates. This is a frigate, in fact. The RA at the back of the flight deck tells me it's actually HMCS Regina itself. Now, that ship has always been in the yacht squadron, as we called it on the West Coast, but that's still okay. Briefly, the aircraft will have come over the flight deck, and the main probe has been lowered below the aircraft. A cable goes down called the messenger cable to pick up the much heavier duty haul down cable that's part of the ship's equipment that's been threaded through the middle of the bear trap that you can see. The haul down cable gets locked into the main probe, and the pilot that's operating the LSO station and the ship equipment off to the starboard forward part of the flight deck, as part of the process, will put landing tension of, hover tension of an appropriate amount on that cable to help the aircraft maintain a stable hover as the ship's rocking and rolling beneath it. You can't really see that right now in this shot. It's really quite calm. But if we have time at the end of the presentation, I've got some interesting footage that gives you a better impression of what actually goes on when the sea is actually rough. So again, at the right time, the deck steadies out, and the pilot will lower the aircraft into a low hover. And at the right point, when both the aircraft commander and the LSO think it's good, the order to land will be given, and he'll apply landing tension to that cable. The pilot will relax pressure on the collective to allow the aircraft to sort of be pulled down into that trap with the probe in the middle of it, at which point the LSO fires the jaws on the trap to clamp on that main probe. That's still not good enough, however, because the aircraft could swivel around that point. So the grid at the back is meant to catch the tail probe. And once the tail probe is lowered into that grid, the aircraft won't swivel, and that would then allow the ship to do a hard port turn, heel over to 25 degrees, and not spit the aircraft off the side of the flight deck. You'll have another shot later on that'll show you the tail probe on this aircraft. These were particular adaptations made to Canadian military Sea Kings from Sikorsky's basic S-61 airframe. The American Navy called them H-3s. Okay. This is a 280 class vessel. I, after a couple of years in Skeena, get assigned to HMCS Athabaskan. I'm not sure which one this is. It might be Athabaskan itself, because that maple leaf on the hangar would tell you it's a Desron 1 vessel, and I know that's Halifax Harbor. This ship was designed to handle aircraft from the get-go, so it has these V-shaped exhaust funnels. So it was to minimize turbulence over the flight deck when the aircraft is getting ready to land or attempting to take off. These lines on the hangar face, if you're using the starboard trap to land, the right-hand pilot lines himself up with that line. If you're doing the landing from the left-hand seat, the left-hand pilot lines up with the leftmost of the right-hand pair. I guess that's all I want to tell you about that particular photograph. HIFR, helicopter in-flight refueling. That was a technique that was developed once we had these 2 aircraft-capable ships. Both of them are airborne. The first one lands, it breaks a landing gear, or the bear trap system fails. So the flight deck is fouled. You're going to run out of gas. So this was a way of taking on a new load of gas and, keeping airborne for another 3.5 or 4 hours while the problem of the fouled flight deck is getting dealt with. So you just come on over, use the hoist to pick up the hose, and you can see that the navigator's connecting the hose to the pressure refueling point just below the cargo door there. And this could be done with any ship that had a tank of aviation fuel on board, even if it didn't have a flight deck. Okay. Here's a shot of a pair of aircraft in a 280. Unfortunately, they stopped putting 2 aircraft in 280s towards the end of that ship's career. And why I say too bad is that we learned tactically that 2 aircraft was 3 times as good as 1. And what I might point out on this slide is, you see that maintenance guy, that technician working on the tail rotor. You can see the way the aircraft are all tucked into the hangar and chained up and lashed down to be able to handle a heavy sea state. The other thing I want to point out is up top here is one of the gyro-stabilized horizon bars. That allowed us to operate at night. Forward of that was an illuminated pitch bar, and forward of that was another horizontal roll bar. And the way we did business is when you were inside the bowling ball, as we called it, out in the North Atlantic at night in November, and it was rough, you would come into a hover beside the ship, but you would hover on those horizon bars rather than trying to follow the ship that was rocking and rolling underneath the horizon bars. And that's how we got business done. You would do that hookup procedure that I described earlier, and at a certain moment, the deck stops for a couple of seconds and it's flat enough to be safe to land on. But the whole focus on hovering and being in a kind of a stable position in order to land was hovering only in reference to those horizon bars. If you tried to chase the ship, you were in big trouble. But again, this is something you learn as a Sea King pilot. I think that's about it for that photograph. And maybe that is done. I want to talk a second about a sea story, if I might. And it's related to me being in Athabaskan. We're on exercise in the Norwegian Sea. And my ship is to clear the stern quarter of the aircraft carrier that we're providing cover for. And I'm out screening. And another Sea King from another ship is screening on the starboard quarter. And we get a contact. Nice solid contact, but it's not moving. Maybe it's a pinnacle. And we phone back to the ship and they say, no, the water depth there is 1,000 fathoms. There's no way that's a pinnacle. So we figure it's a bubblehead that is playing games with us. We're Blue Force. We think this is an orange submarine that we've got, orange being pretend enemy. And what the heck? We call over the other aircraft and we vector him in for a simulated attack. He drops a couple of crackers on this contact. Normally, okay, you got me, I was sunk. The umpire in the boat would normally tell the captain to fire up the flare, admitting that he's been done, but that's not what happens in this instance. This contact is no longer a pinnacle, it takes off at 35 knots. Oh my God, and the chase is on. It's still daylight, and both aircraft, brake dip, go get a couple of pings, follow on his track, jump ahead. And to believe the navigator of that submarine was doing cloverleafs and Cuban 8s trying to get away from us. Oh, well, it's getting dark. I call up the ship, launch the other aircraft. Once it's dark, we can't do manual hovers anymore, and we have to do this tracking on instruments, and it's much slower. Well, as life would have it, the aircraft got there about 5 minutes late, and the guy got away. I go back to my ship to turn over the aircraft to the other crew, and we're debriefing this trip when a guy comes down from the ops room, and he says, that wasn't an orange submarine, it was a red one. Oh, really? What we figured out, it was the Oscar SSGN of the Soviet Navy that was actually tracking that American carrier that we were providing cover for. And in the real world, that's not supposed to happen. I really believe that when that boat got back to Murmansk, the commissar would have turned that captain in and he would have lost his job because we caught him. But again, it was all part of the entertainment as far as I was concerned. Okay. Thank you for your indulgence. Let me load up a couple more pictures if I might. After I'm done my turn on Athabascan, I get sent to this vessel, HMCS Preserver, and it's a supply ship. It had a different role. It provided fuel, food, ammunition to a whole squadron of destroyers. A much larger vessel, so it would pitch some, and our deck limits on that vessel were no more than 20 foot of heave. But because it was so big, it didn't move very much, and it didn't have the haul down system that destroyers did. So that's the flight deck there. This is the hangar here. And in a pinch, you could actually fit 4 Sea Kings in there. So the routine was an operational bird from a destroyer would have a problem. It would fly over and get a good aircraft from us, trade in the one that was broken, and the extra mechanics and specialized technicians you would have on the air department of that ship would fix it and put it back in the pool. But for the air crew, there was a great deal of this going on when you were in that ship. Slinging. Again, my apologies. That's a civilian Sea King, but it was a really good shot of a slung load. We could carry 5,000 pounds on a sling load, and it was a significant role. I'll tell you a story another day about slinging the walk-in freezer from the Eagle River salmon fishing camp in Labrador to No Name Camp. Another thing I got to do at that time, that's a Sea Dragon. That's an American Navy vessel. Sorry, this one is an Air Force version. I think Zoltan took a picture of that at the Tucson Museum. But even though it's main rotor, tail rotor configured, it's heavier and bigger than a Chinook. And the American Navy had minesweeping squadrons on each coast that operated this aircraft. And one of them was famous for clearing Haiphong Harbor of American mines as part of the Vietnam War peace agreement. But they would come up on exercise and sweep Halifax Harbor every summer. And it was a real treat to get to fly that baby. My, oh my, was it ever a monster. So I do a tour recruiting inland in Peterborough for a couple of years, and then I come back to 423 Squadron. And at that time, Larry McWaugh was the commanding officer of the squadron. And that's just a picture of the hangar back in that day. And as soon as that starts, the Gulf War heats up. You might recall that no big Iraqi submarine fleet. So the naval aircraft that were put on board, the flotilla that was sent over to the Persian Gulf, needed to have some adaptations that were made in days, as a matter of fact. Very impressive effort. What did some of the things that they did? This thing was basically an anti-heat seeking missile sort of self-defense suite. This thing up here, I think, fired flares to distract, again, heat-seeking missiles as well. While I'm at it, this is a Billy Pugh net that would be used on the hoist to pluck things and people out of the water. I told you about dumping fuel to get the aircraft off the water. That was the fuel dump pipe. And that's the tail probe I was telling you about that would be fired down to lock into that grid at the back of the flight deck so it wouldn't swivel around the main probe. Okay, that's all we got on that shot. That was a chaff dispenser that they added to the aircraft to defeat radar missiles. This is the front end. And what we have here is, that's the FLIR turret. So forward looking infrared, it gave us a night vision capability. And for those of you whose Arabic is not too rusty, that up there, I think, is 417 in Arabic. Yeah, that's about it for that. I now want to talk about this man for a while, if I might. At this point in time, I'm the Hellardet commander of the Air Department on HMCS Marguerite. And when the war got hot, that ship was assigned to the Standing NATO Force Atlantic, which is a squadron of destroyers, usually from the United States Navy, Canada, Britain, Germany, the Netherlands, and sometimes others get added. Now, each nation takes a turn in command of that squadron for a year at a time. And in my particular instance, it's a Royal Navy Commodore that's the boss. Andrew, at that particular time, is the air officer of his, basically headquarters ship, HMS Campbellton, and all his principal subordinate officers would become the squadron staff officers for their particular discipline. So Campbellton's underwater weapons officer became the underwater weapons coordinator for the whole squadron. So in turn, Andrew, as the air officer of Campbellton, becomes the squadron air officer. And for the next 4 months, he was my de facto boss. You know, I did still report to the captain of my Canadian ship for administrative purposes, but all the aircraft in that squadron got their daily taskings from this man. The paparazzi might have you believe that he only has 51 cards. I'm here to tell you that's not at all true. He is certainly of above average intelligence, and as far as I'm concerned, even to this day, the man is a prince. Har har. I loved the guy. He was great. We never got to fly together, but he landed on my ship, I landed on his, and whenever we were in port, we would always socialize a bit together, and we also had working meetings that we had to take care of when we had the chance to be able to get some FaceTime. An absolutely great guy. I can tell you a story about his bodyguards later on. Okay. Let me see what I got here. One thing is a little bit of a joke, that in a destroyer, for example, when you were in company with another ship, the idea was each ship took a deck cycle. So you would have one aircraft airborne from midnight till noon on one ship, and then the other ship's aircraft would be airborne from noon till midnight. The regulations stipulated that aircrew were entitled to 8 hours of uninterrupted rest a day. We used to tell the fish heads whatever we thought at night was gravy. Sorry. Oh dear, life in the Navy, what can I say? After a second tour, operational, in 423 Squadron, I do a gig for a couple of years in Naval Headquarters as a staff officer. And then I end up in 406 Squadron again. Oh, I got to tell you one last story about that second time round in 423. I am doing a cross-country ferry flight, cross-continent ferry flight. I'm bringing an aircraft back from, excuse me for a second, Victoria to Shearwater to get some major maintenance done. And the grown-ups must have had their reasons, but I've been tasked to do this in the middle of December. Normally the problem with doing that kind of thing with that kind of aircraft at that time of year is you can get stuck in the Rocky Mountains for 3 weeks. That wasn't my problem that particular occasion. I got to Victoria, from Victoria to Calgary in 1 day. But it was a minus 27 cold bowl the moment we passed from the BC-Alberta border heading east. And I had a problem with the main gearbox upon landing at Calgary. And the next morning on Saturday, when I'm scheduled to get to Moose Jaw for the next stop, I have to spend some time cleaning up the fuzz off the gearbox. The flight engineer replenishes the oil, and we have to do a ground run for an hour. I phone up the operations in Moose Jaw and tell them, look, because of this delay, I won't be there until about 6 o'clock, at which point I get told, no, this airfield is closed at 1700. Tower guy goes home. I said, okay, that's fine. I'm a big boy doing a military job. I do not need air traffic control services. I will fly in, land on the ramp near the tower in Moose Jaw, and you're going to give us hangar space anyways, and we'll go find the duty officer and get our quarters. No, you will not come in. I mean, they were going to set up machine gun nests at the edge of the Moose Jaw control zone to shoot me down if I came in after 1700. So I said to hell with them, and I went instead, spent the night somewhere else. I was talking to Gary before the presentation started as to what happened the next morning. The engine did not like the -27 weather at all, and the radial shaft broke. The next morning, Monday, it's reported to my squadron that I am stuck for the better part of a week with an engine change. I guess the guffaws of laughter could be heard all the way down the hallway because they were told Michael was stuck in Regina. Now, I am actually an infamous fan of the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and they were saying, coincidence? I swear I meant to be in Moose Jaw. But carrying on from that. I am going to bring up some more photos, if I might. I am, thank you, carriers. Again, just to jump back a little bit, that's actually the Nimitz, I think. But that last turn in 423, I got my share of carrier landings. It's too easy, they're too big, they don't move, despite that one being heeled over in a high-speed turn. But I've got landings on the USS America in my logbook, the USS Forrestal, the British through-deck cruisers, they call them, the Ark Royal, and I even landed on the French Navy carrier, the Foch, in the Mediterranean once. Okay, frigates. Again, this is a picture of HMCS Regina itself. I never did get attached posted into a frigate, but when I'm instructing a second time in 406 Squadron, we used to deploy to those vessels to do some, seaborne training for some air crew. And I certainly spent some time and have got a number of, as we say, destroyer deck landings, DDLs in my logbook from, in my case, HMCS Ville de Quebec. Beautiful ships. The one thing, though, is that this Gatling gun right there on top of the hangar, okay, was kind of unnerving because it was in your face. As I say on steamers, the front of your main rotor was only 10 feet away from the hangar face, and the aircraft was over 70 feet long. But those things could be set to automatic, and you didn't want to have any software hiccups for sure. Okay. But the time came for me to, I'd done what I wanted to in the military. And this is a sticker that was made up by Trent Roulette, God love him. And it was supposed to have been a joke. You can read flying yesterday's aircraft tomorrow. And it was a little over 35 years at the time. I'm here to tell you I got to enjoy a 50-year of Operation Reunion back in Halifax, and we were still flying Sea Kings. Politicians wouldn't participate in that celebration. It was embarrassing to them, I guess. Another thing I got to do is that was the original paint scheme that these aircraft were delivered to Canada in. And this was in commemoration of the 75th anniversary of the Navy. And I got to fly that aircraft to a family day at Sikorsky Aircraft in Stratford, Connecticut. 30,000 people. It was the best air show I ever went to. They treated us like kings. Paid for everything first class except for booze. Okay. I decide that it's time for me to move on. The first civilian job I applied for was to go fly Hawk 1 for the Calgary Police Service. I ended up being the silver medalist in that competition due to a lack of long lining experience in my case. I can talk about that later too. They ended up inviting me to reapply about 8 months later, but I declined, the path not taken, because I had started another job instead. Again, if you'd indulge me. How am I doing for time? Okay, I switched over to flying the EHS Life Flight Air Ambulance, basically a Nova Scotia asset, if you will. But we did business in all 3 of the maritime provinces. I loved the aircraft. It wasn't new, but I described it, I thought at first, as a sports car. I found out later on that it was more a luxury sedan, and it was just an absolutely great job. When people would ask me about this air ambulance business, I would have to admit, no, in the military I had to work. You can't say that about air ambulance. Life was playing on my computer, watching football games, and saving babies. What's better than that? You didn't have to take work home. I was going to look at offshore, but I wanted to fly a new aircraft, and it was Sea Kings in the offshore game. And even though they had a better schedule and better pay, to me, that offshore business is as boring as being an airline pilot, and I didn't want any of that. So I was at the Halifax base for a little while. That's the new paint job. And somebody thought that made a good PR photo the first time I did a scene call after they'd painted the aircraft. And the firefighters have scouted out a good place for me to land on that particular road, and somebody took that shot. What's it all about? An example. One night, got to go do an obstetrics call to New Glasgow Hospital. So off we go. The weather is miserable, but the babies are born before we get there. And they decide to put the better one, the older one, the little girl, in a land ambulance to go to the IWK in downtown Halifax. We package up the little boy in the incubator and load him on the aircraft. But, 60 knot headwind to get back. And the weather was so miserable that all we could do was an ILS into Halifax Airport. And as life would have it, the short version is Halifax Airport so far out of town. The little girl got to the IWK before her brother did, because I had to break off my ILS to runway 15 because there was this great big ugly thunderstorm marching right up the localizer in my face. So I had to zip over and do an approach on another runway. So both that headwind and having to do multiple instrument approaches and still not getting all that close to the IWK resulted in her being there before her brother was. But the parents sent us that photograph a little while later. Those babies flourished. Happy ending to the story. Sometimes it was not. I learned, as I say, within a week of that job, if you don't know it already, drunk driving really does kill. It's a really bad idea to not wear a seatbelt, and not wearing a helmet when either cycling or skiing is Darwinian. I actually saw a great deal more blood and guts in that job than I did in the military. I will tell you, my last tour on Sea Kings, I was involved up to my eyeballs in the Swiss Air 101 business. I remember being out there at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the short version is we still kept on looking for hours, but once you come across the debris field and you see a sneaker here and a suitcase floating there, but otherwise things absolutely pulverized, that absolutely nobody could live. After a day's worth of flying, my role changed, and I took a shift in the morgue as part of the PTSD team. I got involved in that because a lot of Canadians don't think we suffered any casualties during that first Gulf War. But again, 2 sailors from HMCS Marguerite died in a very tragic diving accident in the island of Madeira when we were getting ready to go into the Mediterranean to keep an eye on Muammar Gaddafi. And we would not have been where we were doing what we were doing if it hadn't been for that war. But moving on, this is me landing at the brand new helipad at the Middleton Hospital in the Annapolis Valley. Again, somebody was taking PR photos from the roof of the building, and the sunlight was just right, and they thought that was a good image to capture, and I kind of like it too. Again, the lighting around the edge allowed us to get in and out of there at night, of course. But this was my office, okay? That's a shot of the Cabot Trail up in Cape Breton near Shetty Camp. Flew in there a number of times. But over the years doing this business, I got to go to every part of the Maritimes. And I would say I got to know the Maritimes much better than people that were born and lived their whole lives there because of this job. And they paid me to do it. Can you believe that? Another shot, if I might. This is the end of my night shift on 9/11. What can I say? It's dawn now, and picked up somebody at Antigonish Hospital, and the track back to the trauma center in downtown Halifax to the rooftop helipad there on the QE2 takes you directly over top of Halifax Airport. And the other guy was flying. I leaned out with my camera through the left-hand window and took that shot. Because again, the only aircraft that were allowed in the air were the fighters and us. So Zoltan would tell you that whenever I fall in love, I do what she wants, and I migrated up to Upper Canada. So I become a floater pilot throughout the 7-base system that my employer is operating in Ontario. And this is a shot of Captain Michael recruiting a couple of future air ambulance helicopter pilots at the Toronto base. And that's the paint job that that S-76 had back in those days. The other places, of course, were Ottawa, Sudbury, a double base in Toronto, 2 aircraft available 24/7, London, Moosonee up on James Bay, interesting place to fly out of. Kenora is near the border with Manitoba, and Thunder Bay. I trained in Thunder Bay, and I certainly took people to the Health Sciences Center there, but I never did go on shift in Thunder Bay, the only one of the 7 that I never worked at. Okay, I'm almost coming to the end, I guess. What might I say? What do we got here? Scene call in Kenora. And that was the closest I could get. We picked up a guy who nearly drowned in that lake. Did he go through the ice? It's hard to, I can't remember now. Forgive me, but again, happy ending. We took him back to Kenora Hospital and he survived. You know, a lot of the work was interfacility transfers. You would take people from a regional hospital to the tertiary care centers, usually in the capital cities. But again, certainly in the summertime, we would be pretty busy. You know, people get silly as soon as the Victoria Day weekend bell gets ringed, and they are out and about doing stuff that they should know better. So the increase in scene calls, road accidents, or people shooting themselves in the foot really crank up in the summertime. So there it is, my Augusta 139. In a 35-year flying career, I finally got to fly a new aircraft for the last 9 months. Again, I loved it. And again, medium-sized aircraft in that case, a little over 16,000 pounds. State-of-the-art avionics. And oh my God, the engines. What a stump puller that thing was. Very, very powerful. I will complain about one thing. I think Bendix probably paid under the table an Augusta engineer to install their transoceanic built-in GPS. It was an ugly piece of machinery. You know, we needed to be airborne in less than 10 minutes from when the go happened, and we didn't need to spend 5 minutes programming that damn thing. And heaven forbid if you got rerouted in the air. They had actually the same rig in the cormorants, and the military couldn't put up with that. So they got a good aviation-friendly Garmin 450, put a suction cup on it, and slapped it in the windshield of those EH-101s in their SAR roll, and didn't even bother turning the Bendix on. But what can you do? I'm going to basically finish up with, oh yeah, there's the mandatory military pilot hero shot with a little bit of helicopter humor. Can you read that? I am going to make mention of the fact I am a rotary wing snob, okay? On the theme of brothers giving each other a hard time, it was mentioned that my brother Patrick has fed his family operating a very productive fixed wing aerial photography and other data gathering business. But I would lay claim to the fact that he has a runway that's sometimes 150 feet wide, almost 2 miles long, and doesn't even move. Landing on this is no challenge. I at least have some modicum of talent, thank you kindly. As I say, I can rub my belly and pat my head at the same time. The navigators in our world used to call bananas pilot food because you can teach a monkey to fly, but that's only true of fixed wing. With that, I will just leave you with one more shot of me and my homies. Actually, I think that's a Sikorsky photograph from the 1940s. Thank you for your kind attention, and